Hi there, it's Pastor Veronica Smith with your evening devotion, and definitely running a little bit behind today. Earlier today, I was a couple minutes late because my son interrupted me getting logged in, and tonight I'm a little bit late because for some reason I could not get our our social media stuff to work. It wouldn't open my camera. It wouldn't even get to our church Facebook page. So I'm hoping that folks will still join me or at least catch it later. But I guess technology is both our friend and our enemy because tonight it was fighting with me every step of the way. So certainly I hope that if you are joining me that you can see and hear and follow along just fine despite the fact that there's been some tech problems. I've had a little bit of trouble with some lag, so don't panic if you see it freeze for a moment. I would just encourage you to wait a moment and then let it refresh. So hopefully it'll be just fine. So, again, I'm Pastor Veronica Smith with your evening devotion, and we are digging deeper into the book When God is Silent by Barbara Brown Taylor. This is, it looks like a book, but it is actually a series of sermons that Barbara Brown Taylor preached at Yale. This is available from Cloister Publishing if you're interested, and copies I know are definitely still available. This is my second copy. I've gotten it pretty recently. My first copy was pretty beat up, so I had to replace it. And you should be able to get it. Not sure if it's available on an audiobook or any sort of um, digital way, like through a Kindle. But I'm sort of a book snob, and I love the smell of paper books and the sound of pages slipping in my fingers. So I don't know as much about those things. I'm a bit of a book purist, I suppose. Um, but what we do is we do not read the book cover to cover. We read excerpts and then kind of dig deeper into those excerpts. And if you have not joined us for any of these sessions about this particular book, I want you to know that that's okay. This is written in such a way, and the excerpts are sort of organized in such a way that if you weren't here for any others, no big thing. You can still follow along, I promise. So don't panic. Rest assured, you can still participate and you won't have missed anything out. The other thing to let you know is that I want to encourage you to get your own copy so that you can indeed read it from cover to cover because it's just an amazing book that really helps us to explore the way we think and talk about our faith. So the section that we're looking at is at the very beginning. It's called Famine. It's the first chapter, and one of the things that this section sort of talks about has to do with language and the way we use language and the impact of words. And I particularly love this section. If you happen to have a copy of this book with you, we're going to be reading pages 12 through 15. And we'll be stopping just shy of the last paragraph on page 15, but that's where we are in case you want to follow along. Otherwise, I invite you to just sit back and listen as I read this section of When God is Silent. A third assault on the nobility of language is the sheer proliferation of words which most of us are faced each day. Not counting taxonomic lists of species, it is estimated that the English language contains some 600,000 words. By comparison, Elizabethan English had about 150,000, and the King James Version of the Bible contains only 6,000. We have words for things that were unknown a century ago: bites, quarks, bazookas, and we have words that have emerged from specialized disciplines: psychotherapy, biotechnology, econometrics. Predictably, perhaps, our care for words has declined as their number has increased. Children who shop at Toys R Us and teenagers for whom the height of cool speech is that of their favorite rap artist do not understand what the fuss is all about when their teachers point out that quick is not spelled Q-U-I-K. The democratization of language, there's a new word for you, has had the effect of making good grammar sound fussy, and the use of any word over 3 syllables a sure sign of the elite. And yet, the words keep coming at us through an ever-expanding variety of media. So many words that some days it sounds as if we live our lives against a wall of constant noise. For some people, it is company. I know one man who keeps a television set going in every room of his house because it helps him feel less lonely. For other people, noise is a weapon. Remember how the FBI broadcast Nancy Sinatra's These Boots Are Made for Walkin' into the Branch Davidian compound in Waco in hopes of driving cult members out? For other people, noise is frankly an addiction. The author of a recent essay in the New York Times Magazine, Tom Rice, confessed that he once spent every waking hour with a Walkman headset plugged in his ears, listening to music or, more often, to educational tapes. He had a brown suede pouch for the machine that he wore around his waist. Every morning I'd strap it on like a gunfighter's belt, he said, low on my hip, ready to face off against my enemies, the potentially empty minutes of the day. Finally convinced that his dependence was beginning to affect his relationships, he unplugged. While he still jumps at sudden noises and often finds himself at a loss for words, he is committed to doing without his Walkman one day at a time. The most unfortunate side effect of all the noise is that many of us has become hard of hearing. We learn to filter out words that are not necessary to our lives, the same way we learn to sleep in a house near railroad tracks. Our brains protect us from the daily barrage of words by increasing our resistance to them. Recent studies show that most people recall only about 25% of what they've heard in the past few days. We do not listen well, and at least part of it is because we can listen much faster than most people can talk. While most human beings speak at a rate of 120 to 150 words a minute, we can process more than 500 words a minute, which makes it hard for us to stay tuned to prolonged communication, especially if the speaker is halting or dull. We tend to use the lag time in a conversation to compose our own responses, which makes us even poorer listeners. Kathy Thompson, who teaches courses on conversation at Alverno College in Milwaukee, was quoted in a recent article by Cynthia Crossan in the Wall Street Journal as saying that we have become a nation of interrupters. At our house, Thompson says, we warn new friends to be careful because we treat conversation like a competitive sport. The first one to take a breath is considered the listener. Psychotherapists, call-in radio hosts, and clergy all reap the benefits of this whirlwind. We are paid to listen, and people who cannot make themselves heard anywhere else in the world line up to talk to us. They may also go online, hunting chat rooms where they can log on or log off at will. Interesting. I'd like to go back and, especially since we're talking about the impact of words and whether we hear things when they're told to us, I'd like to go back and reread to you this section about words that's sort of at the very beginning. Not counting taxonomic lists of species, it is estimated that the English language contains some 600,000 words. By comparison, Elizabethan English had about 150,000, and the King James Version of the Bible contains only 6,000. We have words for things that were unknown a century ago: bites, quarks, bazookas, and we have words that have emerged from specialized disciplines: psychotherapy, biotechnology, econometrics. Predictably, perhaps, our care for words has declined as their number has increased. Children who shop at Toys R Us and teenagers for whom the height of cool speech is that of their favorite rap artist do not understand what the fuss is all about when their teachers point out that quick is not spelled Q-U-I-K. The democratization of language, there is a new word for you, has had the effect of making good grammar sound fussy and the use of any word over 3 syllables a sure sign of the elite. Now, I don't know if you all are familiar with this, but there's a television series that was on for a very long time. It was based in Seattle, and that was about a psychiatrist on the radio called Dr. Frazier, and I am sure that many of you have heard of the television show Frasier, and that show was sort of infamous for a little while, and the reason it was infamous was because when it was first suggested, people thought that people who are responsible for trying to see if television shows make money thought that it wouldn't be watched and it wouldn't be popular because of the way that the characters on the show speak, that they use a lot of highly educated and academic language, They use, they use many words over three syllables, and it was sort of considered smart television because of the way they conversed in very verbose, lots of vocabulary, lots of big words, things like that. Because that was the way the character was written. It made the most sense for his character, and so he did have a lot of those conversations, and he had those conversations with his family as well, and his friends and the people he worked with. And so I found it very fascinating, that people think, oh well, no one, the people who are working at these movie studios think that no one would watch that because it was too smart, that they used too elitist language. And that's interesting that someone might think that it wouldn't make money. But then I think about the fact that I was taught when I was a kid that the average local newspaper is written from a fifth grade level, and that the average large city newspaper, like the New York Times or the Washington Post or the LA Times, Chicago Tribune, Miami Herald, Seattle Times would be another one, that they are written at an eighth grade level. Um, and I've always really found that fascinating, as well. And that the reason that it is written that way is because people would stop reading at the sign of words that were, over three syllables, that they wouldn't want to read anything like that. Um, and so the language gets watered down. And one of the first thoughts that I had was, I can't imagine watering down some of the beautiful speech and language we have. I mean, I certainly don't expect people to regularly find a way to incorporate the longest word in the English language into their regular conversation, which, by the way, the longest word in the English language is anti-disestablishmentarianism. I only know that because it's a joke to be able to say that you know what it is. And so I certainly don't expect people to use that word in regular conversation. But I think that we lose a lot when we water down what we say, that our speech becomes like a glass of water instead of a glass of iced tea, if we keep watering it down more and more. And yet I acknowledge that, if people aren't able to hear things that are spoken in this way because they think that good grammar sounds fussy and the use of any word over three syllables is a sure sign of the elite, then it is our responsibility as those called to go out and share God's word and share our faith with others, to make sure that the language we use is language that people understand. Pastors, we talk a lot about how it's important for us to make sure that people understand the words that we use to talk about faith and theology and God, because we go to school and spend a long time studying these things, and it means that we pick up some of those words that are we consider insider language, that words that you would only know if you went to seminary, because we don't talk about them commonly, and that we are cautious using those words that the average person doesn't know because they become a stumbling block for someone to access God, and we don't want to become a stumbling block either. And so I appreciate that both sides of this are really addressed in Barbara Brown Taylor's work, because she acknowledges the fact that yes, there are people who speak one way, and there are people who speak another way, and we have to be willing and able to bring our faith and our story of God, to people, no matter what their language is, whether they've got a 6,000 word vocabulary like the King James version of the Bible, or a 600,000 word vocabulary like the English language. That we remember that not everyone hears things the same way, and that can be a challenge because you may not know how someone hears things, but it can also explain why some people hear a message one way and some people hear it another way. Um, I do try to make sure that when we are trying to create resources and events and activities for those who are new to the church, and not just our church but to church as a whole, that we try to watch the language that we use, that we don't use We don't use words that you could only know because you've been involved in the church your whole entire life. Um, One word that I imagine that many of you are watching, you're probably familiar with the word Eucharist. And the word Eucharist, Eucharist, Eucharist means communion. And most of us know what the word communion is, even unchurched people who have watched, you know, Monty Python and the Holy Grail or Raiders of the Lost Ark have some familiarity with what communion is. But the word Eucharist, maybe not so much and maybe not as familiar. And it doesn't mean that we don't use that word, but that we make sure that those who are part of that group hearing it, that they know what it means, or they have a way to find out what it means, or that we're teaching things to help people to understand what words like that mean. We have lots of insider language in our church that we may not even realize. There are people who, if I say that I've been ordained, they may not be familiar with what it means to be ordained. And that means I've been set apart by the church and called to serve in a congregation. Um, but that's a word that is not used in everyday conversation. I had to learn that word myself. Um, there are lots of words that we use in the church that may be unfamiliar to people. There are people who may not know what the word baptism means, which seems like such an easy word to know. But if you've never been in a church before, you haven't been exposed to church, you may not know what that word means. And so we have to meet people where they are. And sometimes that means watering down our language. Sometimes that means using language that may seem stuffy, because that will reach people as well. It's always fascinating hearing about the makeup of different churches. And one of the beautiful things about Emmanuel and why I love serving Emmanuel so much is because we have such a wide variety of people who worship in our space. People from all ages and stages of life, all different kinds of backgrounds and experiences. And that is a wonderful and beautiful thing. And what that means is that I can I can sometimes give a sermon that really hits the mark for people based on the words and language that I use, and sometimes it doesn't. But it may be a different group of people who are really impacted, say, the following week. So, because of different words and different language, and that is a wonderful thing, and it means that we have something for everyone in that case. I love Barbara Brown Taylor's focus on language and words. It is so incredibly important for us as followers of God, as believers in Christ, to just to think about the words that we use, to think about how we describe our faith and our beliefs and the things that we do to follow God and to live out Jesus's call to serve him and serve God's kingdom. um, People listen to those words, and the words that we share, they really matter. So that's my homework for you. I want you to think about the words that you're using to describe your faith, and think about the audience that you might be talking to. The way that you share your faith story with someone who's never stepped foot in a church in their entire life is going to be a whole lot different, and you're going to use a whole lot different language than if you speak to your grandchild who has been to church every single Sunday, but is still learning what it means to be church in the world and to be a follower of Christ. And that may look completely different from the way you describe your faith to someone who was raised in the faith and left and hasn't been back in years. It may look different to someone who has never gone to school and doesn't know how to read than it does to someone with a PhD or a doctorate. It's worth it for us to think about our audience, to think about the people we're speaking to and what language might work for them. It is important for us to think about words. Words have value, and words are important, and words very much matter. So think about all the different ways you can share your faith with people who use different language than you. and who maybe aren't familiar with some of that insider language from the church that we use so easily. So that's my message for you tonight, my friends. And I hope that you'll join me next week. We're going to be pushing a little bit more forward in the book. In fact, we're going to be moving on, moving a little bit forward and going to one of my favorite sections really soon. I'm very excited for that. My favorite section is chapter 2, and it's called Silence. So God loves you, and so do I. I hope that you have a wonderful night and that you will join me again. We gather for our online devotions every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. and 6:45 p.m., and that's Central Time. And if you happen to miss it, I want you to know that that's okay, because our devotions immediately after they're filmed live on Wednesdays, within just a few minutes, they're available on our Facebook page to watch previously recorded. And then those same devotions will be shared on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page, or not Facebook page, our website. So they'll be on Facebook, YouTube, and our website. If you want to go to our website and more easily find all of our most recent videos, they're broken up into story times, devotions, and worship services. You can just go to www.colleenemmanuel.com. So have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you next time. Good night.